Long ago, in the faraway land of ancient Burbank, was a golden age of powerful animation and extraordinary directors. And the greatest and strongest of all these directors was the mighty Musker and Clements. Our story actually begins with the great mouse detective. No, really. Well, actually, no. You could easily say it begins before that, but for our purposes, let's say it begins with the great mouse detective. This film had four credited directors, these two guys named John Musker and Ron Clements among them, and the great mouse detective did okay enough that Disney was willing to give some of these directors bigger projects. Jeffrey Katzenberg was in charge of Disney Animation at the time, and he wanted to bring Disney Animation Studios back to its former glory. So, in a pitch meeting in 1985, Ron Clements pitched two projects of note, an adaptation of Hans Christian Andersen's The Little Mermaid, and what was effectively Treasure Island in space. And Jeffrey Katzenberg was like, that sounds kind of stupid. Maybe keep workshopping that. But that mermaid thing seems legit. Let's do it. And Clements was like, okay. And so, with his former great mouse detective co-director John Musker, they go off and make The Little Mermaid. The Little Mermaid ended up doing gangbusters for the studio and ushering a new era of animation. So they come back to Katzenberg like, hey, so about that Treasure Island in Spit, and Katzenberg is like, hey, actually, one of our former animators has been working on this intricate and deeply artistic Arabian Nights type thing for like a decade, so let's rip that off and release him before he can even finish his. And so they like, okay. And then Musker and Clements go make Aladdin. And Aladdin makes even more money for the studio. And suddenly Disney's back on track, in no small part thanks to these two guys. So now with two big hits under their belt, Musker and Clements go back to Katzenberg like, hey, look how successful we are, can we please make Treasure Planet now? And Katzenberg is like, I don't know. That still sounds pretty stupid, but I tell you what, you make one more movie that does impossibly well at the box office, something that has every commercially viable element imaginable, thereby rendering it impossible to fail, and lets you make your project that you actually care about. And lo, so that these gives could finally make their beloved Treasure Planet, they first had to create the most commercially viable thing you can imagine, aggressively tailored to appeal to as wide a demographic as possible, referencing as many popular 90s things as would fit in its 89-minute runtime, and combining such dissonant tones and styles that audiences across the land would it was okay. Everything. I value a usual to they so their resistance say well This movie is not a disaster. There's a lot about it that I like, Both its villain and its art design rank among me favorites in all of Disneydom, but the film didn't do well upon release, and Disney then basically swept it under the rug. And years have passed since 1997. Empires have risen and fallen, entire civilizations swept off the map, all having never found the answer to that one burning question: why did Disney's Hercules underperform? I mean, I know it is one of the most important issues of our day, and no one is courageous enough to talk about it except me, and obviously, there's a lot to talk about. Look at how long this video is. Cause it's not actively bad. There is a lot, in fact, that is great about this movie, but why is it on the whole not as good as the sum of its parts? I've spent the bitter part of 2 decades unraveling this mystery. Someone's gotta do it, apparently. I count Hercules as a whole, as generally the weakest of the 90s Disney movies, and this was a decade with singing, dancing gargoyles rhyming Adonis with croissants. Now, when I say weak, I don't mean actively inept. See the Phantom of the Opera review for that, and I don't mean being inaccurate to the source material either. If you, like me, were an insufferable 12-year-old at the time, most of your criticism probably boiled down to it not being faithful to the mythology. And just for clarity's sake, I'm calling him Hercules, not Heracles. So just get that out of your system. Comment whatever, I don't care. When I talk about parts versus whole, Hercules had elements that were really great, but when put together, it just didn't really jive. Pocahontas, I think, is the worst of the 90s Disney movies because it's more boring and less good, but I'd call it also a stronger movie because the parts gel, the tone is consistent, the stakes are high, and the motivations are clear. Hunchback of Notre Dame has a similar, albeit flipped, tone problem as Hercules, but again has a much stronger whole. I probably would have never even noticed the tone problem if I had run across Hercules the animated series when I was in college. There are some definite duds of episodes in that, especially considering the budget was basically $10 per episode once the movie underperformed, and some main characters that are really fucking annoying. But I think the animated series embodies what the movie should have been. Panther. Everything here and severe view as a I review the animated series doesn't to bother with those massive plot contrivances. It completely ignores the really important plot point in the movie that Hades didn't to know Hercules was alive the whole time, which is good because that never made sense anyway. What I think Hercules wanted to be was what the Emperor's New Groove actually succeeded in doing, a comedic take on a mythologized history. Sincere, sure, but ultimately a fun romp that never took itself too seriously. What Hercules ended up being was every fucking thing under the sun. which I guess was kind of inevitable given that you were instructed by corporate to make it everything to everyone, and whether or not you get to make your passion project is on the line. And whether you way of they they every to you to so where will so you are real Let's discuss. This movie is a comedy, arguably more than any other Disney movie that came out that decade. 2 words. I am retired, at least as far as the marketing goes. That wouldn't be a problem or even noteworthy, except that this has some of the darkest stuff in all of Disneydom. Yep, that woman just got crushed by a several-ton stone column. I'm going to use this one scene as an example. So this entire climactic scene where Hercules goes and fights the Titans is dogged by this tonal yo-yoing. Megara gets squished. Somehow she's still breathing. Okay. Hercules races off and all sense of Megara-related urgency is lost. We revert right back to that comedic tone. And it almost feels like the gods didn't really need Hercules. They just needed, like, moral support or a cheerleader. And this scene goes by so fast. Zeus lobs a couple of lightning bolts. Hercules then sucks them into the tornado jet and lobs them into the sky, and the plot explodes. And that's the end of that. And they re-laughing and giving high fives, and then Hades reminds them that Meg is dying. AIDS, and then they done. Like Hercules had completely forgotten about that little detail. And then less than 30 seconds after wacky nonsense, we read down here like, no, yeah, this movie has got a tone problem. It's not as bad as Hunchback, though. And since you people love that nitpicky plot hole crap, I'm gonna go ahead and get that out of the way before we get into the deeper stuff. I mean, who are we kidding? I love it too. So I feel like there is a difference between a plot hole and just a contrivance, but I don't think it's necessarily like a black or white thing. It's, more of a gradient. That said, Hades orders his minions to kill Hercules as a baby, and he doesn't find out that they failed until 18 years later. Hades apparently doesn't talk to any of the gods. I mean, this kid's your nephew. How did you miss that you failed to kill him for 18 years? I mean, Zeus ordered all of the gods to go look for him. You'd think he'd have at least, sent a memo to the underworld. Also, Hades, you seem like a smart guy. You wouldn't want to, check. Make sure your bumbling minions got the job done. Make sure your bumbling minions got no. I mean, it's not like they re-related or anything. The fates. I thought you knew everything. Hades, the villain, makes two bargains with Hercules and keeps both of them. Hercules, the hero, makes one bargain with Hades and does not keep it. You get her out, she goes. You stay. Our hero. Anyway, that's not really a plot hole so much as a raging hypocrisy, but I guess that's what you get when your villain is way more likable than your hero. Actually, I'd love to see a version of this where Hercules keeps his end of the bargain, and Meg goes, and he stays, and it turns into like Beauty and the Beast, and they kind of hate each other at first, but then like Hades learned to change his ways, and it's just a love story for the ages. Goddamn, I would watch the shit out of that movie. If you can prove yourself a true hero on Earth, your godhood will be restored. I can't just make you a god. Is that hard and fast rule? Any true hero attains godhood. Or does it only apply to ex-gods who drank Hades, mortality Jewess? Speaking of which, how do we get around Hercules' immortality? I think you gotta turn the little sunspot. I think you got to turn the little mortal. Hades has this Jewess floating in a room devoted to the Jewess that robs gods of their immortality. He calls it his pink Jewess room. Where did he get the Jewess? Who knows? Why does he only have one Jewess? Who knows? Why hasn't he used it on Zeus before this? Hercules has a doggy tag. Is that in case Zeus forgets his name? The ticking clock of the planets aligning is arbitrary and lame and lazy. In 18 years, precisely, the planets will align. I mean, it's not like a plot hole, really. It's just a weakest ticking clock. Like on this day, the planets will make a doom tornado. And you couldn't do your god lightning thing before that, but you can now because the doom tornado got the water out of the way, I guess. Then again, a lot of shit in Greek mythology is arbitrary. See, she ate some pomegranate seeds. So now that means she has to come stay with me for half the year every year. That's according to the rules I just made up. Zeus has no problem getting Thetatins underground the first time, but now with an army of gods, they are defeated almost immediately. Maybe they just got lazy. And possibly the biggest continuity error in any Disney movie. So this movie has a lot of problems like that, and they are a lot more egregious than other Disney movies, but unlike with Phantom Review, again, We already covered this sort of thing. I'm not really going to talk about the filmmaking so much. In this one, we're going to concentrate on structure, character, theme, and influence. So let's start with influence. In translating the story for a modern audience, Musker and Clements claimed that Hercules appealed to them because it would allow them to do a superhero story while also commenting on the world of celebrity athletes and endorsement deals. Okay, here's the thing. I can see where you would get that ancient Greek hero equals superhero plus sports star, but endorsement deals. Put a pin in that. We're going to come back to that. Pin that up on the wall. Let's start with the hero thing. Let's with this the hero they go I happen to be a hero. The Greek idea of a hero, while bearing some similarities, is not the same as our modern idea of a hero. For the Greeks, heroes were in this context historical figures of cultural import who either did exceptional things or had exceptional abilities, and were almost always descended from Zeus, because Zeus got around. But they were important figures, not necessarily nice ones. And also, Greek heroes were deeply flawed. And I don't mean flawed as in snapping a guy's neck to save the world and did I do the right thing flawed. I mean like flew into a murderous god, induced panic and murder your wife and children flawed. Hercules did a lot of fucked up shit. A Disney hero is about as far cry as one can get from the traditional Greek hero. Greek heroes are always tragically flawed. Every Disney protagonist in the 90s, tragic flaw was clumsiness. He's too dangerous to be around normal people. An entire canon of Bella swans. But let's say that, for the sake of argument, a hero is defined by our modern mythology as a superhero. In that case, a hero is defined by their selflessness. By contrast, Greek heroes were more about quests for glory. You know, Odysseus didn't go Odysseying for the greater good. They were more defined by their importance to the culture than by their inherent goodness. And that way, they have more in common with, say, King Solomon of Israel than Superman, a historical/religious figure rather than some ideal of morality. So the workaround here to make this work for our modern definition of a hero is that in this version of ancient Greece, being a hero is like a job one can aspire to. He's just another chariot chaser. You know, like professional athlete. Which is an interesting idea, and I think works as a concept. But they have a lot of wiggle room in terms of story because most people, while familiar with the strongman Hercules archetype, aren't familiar with any of his stories. So the checklist for what people would have associated the word Hercules with in 1997, besides Kevin Sorbo, would have been A. Greek, be strong. And that's about it. Oh, he's a little Hercules. Show me muscle again. Oh, Hercules. 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 Like, sure, knew about the 12 leapers of Hercules and that Hades was the bad guy. But if you ignore me back in 1995, the most obscure thing you probably knew about Hercules is that Arnold Schwarzenegger played him once. That is not Hercules. Some have stated, I have stated, that this movie borrows almost nothing from the mythology in terms of its story, and that's not entirely fair. In Hercules, the main threats come from the Titans. Olympus would be that way. At the beginning, it references the big battle, which is called the Titanomachy. 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 Okay. Anyway, mythologically, Hercules had nothing to do with that, and the Titans never got out. But there was a less well-known myth known as the Gigantomachy, where the gods of Olympus fought a bunch of giants rather than Titans. There was a prophecy in this that had it that the giants would only be defeated if a mortal was to help the gods, and Hercules did help out with that one. So in this movie, they basically combining the Gigantomachy and the Titanomachy, and that's fine. So the Titans in Hercules are basically a mush of everything. Socially giants, Titans, the Cyclops. And the 12 leapers of Hercules are there, sort of. They just referenced visually during a montage. And then again here. So these guys clearly did their homework. There is much more here rooted in Greek mythology than people give it credit for. That said, the bulk of the story's influence is not from that. The two main influences in Disney's Hercules are Superman and Rocky. Rocky is a ragtag underdog story about a poor but plucky boxer who gets his chance when the heavyweight champion of the world, Apollo Creed, decides to have a fight against a nobody in order to stage a high-profile, easy win. Plucky will have a very although you know tell oh they have But Rocky trains really hard, and to everyone's shock, manages the whole 15 rounds against Creed, who only barely wins. But really, Rocky wins because love. And Superman is a Christ allegory about an alien man who comes to Earth already gifted with superhuman strength, powers, and compassion, and who is instructed by his alien coast dad to go set a good example for the human. This reason above all, their capacity for good, I have sent them you, my only son. Hercules has to train, like Rocky, despite having been divinely given his gifts like Superman. This is written off in the movie as he's clumsy, so he doesn't really need to learn how to do the thing, but rather how to control the thing that he's already been given. So rather than letting the movie be its own new thing that isn't overly derivative, all I want to do is go the distance. I can go the distance. Go the distance. Go the distance. The core of the film is trying to mush Rocky and Superman. It's not wrong, but it's not only a stretch in terms of things totally to combine. It's also just way too derivative. Because inspiration is one thing, but this movie goes way out of its way to let you know just how much it's lifting from other movies that, in the back of your mind, you're always reminded in this subconscious way how not only is this movie not letting itself be its own movie, but of these other, better movies it's lifting from. Like, maybe you don't hate Kid Rock's all summer long, singing Sweet Home, Alabama all summer long. But it's always going to be this weird mush of Sweet Home, Alabama, and Werewolves of London, which given a second's thought is like, what? Sports movies typically end with a big match at the end, and superhero movies tend to have the hero's motivation derived from some sense of duty to serve and protect the masses. With great power comes great responsibility. As a sports movie, there is no big match Hercules is training for, and as a superhero movie, the hero part is just a means to an end. You all get your chance. You just need some kind of catastrophe. Meg at one point even calls Hercules out on how he doesn't really care about the people he portends to want to save. Kids. Trapped. Full. This is great. You really choked up about this, aren't you? The movie kind of has a mean, dismissive attitude towards the populace at large. They are either catty, yeah, and who are you? Or judgmental, have you ever reversed a natural disaster? Or mindlessly sycophantic? They are just a means to an end. Rocky's story and Superman's story are non-complementary, so by combining them you have a Rocky movie where Rocky dozed to know what he's training for, and a Superman movie where Superman feels no sense of duty to the people, and is only a hero to them because he's told that doing so will get him what he wants. So do you remember how we put a pin in the filmmakers wanting to comment on celebrity endorsement? Well, okay, we read back to that part now. When you re-watching a movie, any movie, basically everything you see on the screen will contain some form of shorthand. For instance, here is Hercules getting down on his knees and praying to Zeus. Almighty Zeus. Now, a good boy in ancient Greece probably would have, brought a goat and slaughtered it on that altar, rather than getting down on his knees and praying like a Christian. Do things the proper way. The audience associates getting on their knees with piety, therefore this is shorthand. And this has nothing to do with historical accuracy and everything to do with using shorthand to get information to the audience using cultural knowledge the audience is presumably familiar with. Pop culture references became an increasingly popular form of shorthand in animation ever since Aladdin, and this movie has a lot of that. The audience is familiar with these things, and without the lines being drawn explicitly, our mid-90s audience is still able to draw the lines between Hercules and celebrity athletes being wealthy and endorsing products. Hercules isn't just Rocky and Superman. He's also Michael Jordan, from pain-wearing Hercs to panic-consuming then not McDonald's that Hercules has been celebrity endorsing. How does this tie into the film thematically? After he trains with Phil, Hercules goes to Thebes, which is a thinly veiled version of New York that was already dated in 1997. This is the big city in which Hercules goes to make it. Then Hades stages a battle with the intent of killing Hercules, but inadvertently makes him an overnight sensation. After that, we get a montage with all of these references to sports stardom signing autographs, fans wearing his jersey, appearance fees, royalties, action figures, sweatshops making your product, endorsing fast foods, Air Jordans, our Herc had cash to burn, yeah. Money who? Hercules doesn't set out like, I'm going to go be a hero, and that will net me fame and fortune. Yay. Fame and fortune just kind of happened to him incidentally, so there was never a point where he sought out wealth and fortune, and then learned the error of his ways. He never tries to win Meg over with his fame and fortune. It's just kind of there. And this would have worked if Hercules had a more arrogant starting point, or maybe had equated fame and fortune with personal worth, like Aladdin did and Spider-Man did. This points to why Cusco is a much more compelling character. He was genuinely flawed and arrogant, and eventually he learned the error of his ways. I'm not saying Hercules needed to be like Cusco, but for wealth and fame to be framed as not the point of being a true hero, he kind of needed to want it. But he never cared about any of that. This isn't a character flaw. It doesn't corrupt him at all. It doesn't make him egotistical or make him lose sight of what it means to be a hero. In the end, the references end up kind of being hollow. It's less a comment on celebrity athlete endorsement culture, or homage to Rocky, than it just trying to remind the audience something they are already familiar with without actually exploring it. Chosen one narratives are easy to write, because then you don't need to come up with a good and compelling reason for why our hero is the center of the conflict. But they re hard to make interesting, because there's no good and compelling reason for why our hero is the center of the conflict. And you notice that most popular heroes' journey stories don't involve a prophecy proclaiming them to be the chosen one. Frodo wasn't prophesied, Katniss wasn't prophesied, Luke Skywalker wasn't prophesied. They were all ordinary people thrust into extraordinary circumstances by chance or plot stuff or them wanting to do a thing. The only real chosen one character in the Star Wars universe is Anakin, and we all remember how that turned out. Even Harry Potter ends up being more of a send-up of chosen one narratives than a chosen one narrative played straight. His chosen oneness comes into play more in how people treat him than as it pertains to the actual plot, and most of the conflicts of the individual stories have more to do the periphery of the universe as a whole, rather than the fact that Harry is the only person who can save the world, which ultimately turns out not to be true, by the by. The chosen one narrative was even more pointedly dissected in the Lego movie, and the whole point of that ends up being that there is no chosen one. Thick chosen one narratives work better in TV shows than in movies. Contrast this with something like Buffy, who was one in a long line of chosen ones and could die at any moment. Avatar: The Last Airbender and The Legend of Korra take a similar approach to their chosen ones. Their stories are about the day-to-day dealing with it. Disney movies mostly stayed away from chosen one prophecies. The closest we get is probably Aladdin. Aladdin's chosen oneness is what gets him into the cave to get the lamp, but this aspect is completely done and over with by the end of Act One of the film, and the rest of the film's conflict has nothing to do with it. The momentum of the film is fully propelled by character motivation and is rooted in actual stakes. Simba's arc has an element of destiny to it, but this has more to do with duty than prophecy. In Hercules, the only reason Hades has it in for Hercules is because the fates told him to, because prophecy. And by the end of the film, they have built up to no enmity, because they don't really know each other, and they have no reason to be at odds with each other besides prophecy. And again, contrast this with a show, where they do know each other, and do develop a dynamic. Hey, if I could only turn one person to stone, I'm glad it was Hercules. I hated that kid. The only thing that makes Hercules special, the only reason Hades pays any attention to him at all, is a prophecy that Hercules has no idea about. Nearly every iota of plot momentum is manufactured by contrivances outside of Hercules' control. So the result is a story that is not being pushed by actions or character development, but is instead being pulled by its nose by the plot contrivance of destiny. So if you want to learn about screenwriting and screenplay structure, Disney's Hercules is the perfect vehicle for Baby's first three-act structure, because it is so carefully and clearly delineated. And if you were wondering why I'm taking the time to go through this, it's because I'm trying to save you. I'm trying to save you from the student loans. Don't go to film school. Watch internet videos. Hercules has a very simple, very traditional three-act structure. So we can use this as an opportunity to examine story structure as it pertains to Hollywood movies. Backstory. We learn who Hercules is and how the universe works. Excuse him. Should Hercules fight, you will fail. Inciting incident. Hades hears the prophecy that Hercules will defeat him. This leads Hades to turning Hercules into a mortal. This is it. Don't you see? Maybe they have the answers. Point of attack. Hercules finds out that he's adopted. Now, some people say that point of attack and inciting incident are the same thing. And these people are wrong. The inciting incident sets the plot in motion. The point of attack is the moment the central conflict and character motivation appears and the primary action of the story can get moving. The central conflict. I feel like I really don't belong here. Hercules wants to find out where he belongs. This culminates at the end of Act One. Hercules presents his central conflict to Zeus. Zeus tells him how to fix it. If you can prove yourself a true hero on earth, your godhood will be restored. This is called a lock-in, also known as the end of Act One. Our hero has his quest and now he goes out to quest it. I won't let you down, Father. Go be a true hero, Hercules, and that will solve your central conflict. Act Two is typically split into two segments. In Hercules, these two segments are very clearly defined. A first culmination occurs at the end of the first half of the second act. In Hercules, it's where he proves himself by defeating the Hydra. The midpoint is Hercules attaining fame and fortune. It is fame are here for civil fame point for food Important to note also that the midpoint doesn't necessarily fall right in the middle of the movie. The Lion King has an unusually long first act and a really short second act, so its midpoint, which is where he meets up with Nala, happens around 60 through the movie. Gotta blaze, there's a whole cosmos up there waiting for me with hey, my name on it. The end of Act 2 also generally sees the resolution of the main tension. In this case, Hades releasing Thetitans while building a new tension for Act 3. Thetitans now having been released, now we have to go defeat them. This is called the main culmination and usually coincides with the hero being at his lowest point. Again, illustrated really, really clearly here. Twist in the third act, Meg sacrifices herself for Hercules. Hercules gets his strength back. The twist in the third act is important because it shifts the focus of the final tension. The main tension is no longer, will we defeat Thetitans, which is part of what makes his little cul-de-sac where he actually does go and wackily defeat the Titans all the more problematic for the tone, by the by. It's will Megdi. The stakes are much higher. Climax, Hercules sacrifices himself for Meg, becomes a true hero. Now here's the thing, central conflict. The central conflict in pretty much all of the 90s Disney movies was about self-identity and finding oneself. And Hercules is probably the most overt in that regard alongside Tarzan. Both have the same central conflict. I am an outsider and I want to find out where I belong. And same resolution. This sexy lady is where I belong. Resolution. You were willing to give your life to rescue this young woman. So the resolution resolves the conflict between sports star equals self-serving and superhero equals selfless, but it does not resolve Hercules' central conflict. Which brings us to strings to in screenplay terms, motivation is described as want versus need. In a story, a character needs to grow or change or learn something for a satisfying character arc. Not all the time, but in Disney movies, yeah, all the time. And generally, the want and the need are related but aren't necessarily the same thing. The character is motivated by a want set up in the first act. I want to be where the people are. I want adventure in the great wide somewhere, just to live one day out there. And their growth is detailed by meeting a need at the end of the third act. Aladdin, want. We all be rich. Live in a palace. Need. I gotta start pretending to be something I'm not. Simba, want. I guess you can change the past. Need. Yes, the past can't hurt. But the way I see it, you can either run from it or learn from it. So one fine day, Hercules finds out he's adopted, and he goes to find out what's up. Why do I feel so out of place? Mom and Dad. Go find out. Good. Go. Fine. Good. Perfectly good starting point. And you need to learn to become a hero so you can be a god again. And Hercules is like, okay, that makes perfect sense. I'll learn to be a true hero. So Hercules want to find where I belong. And his need, which is being selfless, is the mark of a true hero. Well, one doesn't really build to the other. This culminates when he sacrifices himself for Meg, which would indicate that he needed to learn that being a hero is self-sacrificing, but that doesn't really have anything to do with his main motivation, which is to find out where he belongs or to resolve some character flaw. He was always kind of an innocent, nice guy. Not the most altruistic, but not exactly selfish either. Hercules wants basically the same things as Aladdin, but he gets that halfway through the movie. He never has to accept himself to be respected by the masses. So self-sacrifice is noble, sure, but it's not a culminating moment for his character like it was for, say, Cusco, who was selfish, or Aladdin, who was pretending to be something he was. Basically, his want, a sense of belonging, and his need, being self-sacrificing, don't really have anything to do with each other. One does not resolve the other, which makes for a weak character arc. And you could say, but Hades. But the Hades plot isn't relevant to Hercules' motivation, because at no point does Hercules even learn about the prophecy, and he doesn't even meet Hades up until the end of the movie, which also makes this show kind of limp. Let her go. I've been waiting for this moment for 10 minutes. Look again at Aladdin. The thing that he and Jafar are fighting over, namely the genie, is directly related to Aladdin's character growth. There is a point where Aladdin decides he won't let the genie go because the genie helps him maintain his facade. Without you, I'm just Aladdin. But his character arc culminates with him letting the genie go. And Aladdin's growth also relates to the antagonist, Jafar, because letting the genie go is something Jafar would never do. At its core, the problem with Hercules' motivation is that, unlike all of the other Disney characters, it's not an internal motivation. With Disney, okay. But if I don't become a true hero, I'll never be able to rejoin me father, Zeus. He doesn't want to be a hero because he wants it. He wants it because he was told to. Some of the most memorable characters in the last 20 years, Walter White, Tony Soprano, Cersei Lannister, Daniel Plainview, these characters do some fucked up shit and are rarely if ever sympathetic, but the audience engages with them highly because they are highly motivated. You read and write, and you see this more on television because you have a lot more time to really explore character depth and nuance. And use these characters as examples, not because they belong in Disney movies, but to illustrate that it is more important for a character to be motivated than to be sympathetic or relatable. Hercules is certainly the latter, but not the former. And even though on a personal level I really hate most movies that have some sort of "you lied to me" engineered conflict, let's ignore that. Meg's character arc is much stronger than Hercules because her stakes are much higher, her dilemma more intense, and her motivations clearer. Even though history has taught her that she can't trust men or her own feelings, which her bitchy gay boyfriend Hades details explicitly. This one is different. He's honest and he's sweet. Please. He would never do anything to hurt me. He's a guy. You deserve a better movie, Meg. In fact, everyone in this movie deserves a better movie. Meg deserves a better movie. Hercules deserves a better movie. Hades deserves a better movie. Phil, actually no, not Phil, Phil. I am real too. Dang it, when I say I'm fond of this movie, that is what I mean. I am fond of the characters, I'm fond of the style, I'm fond of the idea, of the tone, when it's being fun and actually enjoyable. The bones of the thing I am not fond of, and that is one of the most important parts of any movie. To make it clear, I do not mean to say that there was nothing risky or new or innovative in this movie. Far from it. It has the first Disney heroine who starts out in league with the bad guy, and who's not only got a past with men, but she's gotta be pushing 30 given how world-weary she is. Well, you know how men are. They think no means yes, and get lost means take mine. I'm yours. Don't worry, Shorty here can explain it to you later. Like I said, Phil. The risk of going with a straight comedic villain is one of the best things in the movie, despite the tonal problems. This is also the first Disney movie since Fantasia, oh yeah, to have named black characters. Yep, 1997. That's how long it took. This is one of the most stylized of the Disney canon, thanks in large part to the filmmakers hiring Gerald Scarfe as the concept artist. He was a New Yorker cartoonist, but at the time, he was most famous for doing the art for Pink Floyd's The Wall. For doing the New Yorker, the code. And the style Scarf came up with for the movie was pretty out there, but you can totally see its influence in the finished product. And here is the sad irony of Hercules. Like Hercules learning to be a hero as a means to a different, unrelated end, Musker and Clements made Hercules as a means to a different, unrelated project. They had to do this thing in order to earn the thing they actually cared about. Katzenberg left Disney in 1994 under not very friendly circumstances, but the studio made good on Katzenberg's promise, and Treasure Planet exists. I found it pretty unmemorable, and to this day is the biggest flop Musker and Clements were involved in. And I take no schadenfreude in that. Let me be clear, I actually really respect these guys and what they've done for animation, but it didn't ruin them. They refine. They redoing fine. Everything good and memorable about Hercules stems from the filmmakers taking risk. And that is the essence of really great films. It is a combination of risk and of glitch, of new and of safe. The art is in how you weave the two together. So now that's it. We can finally put it to rest. The long-standing mystery of what exactly made Hercules kind of me in the eyes of the public and Disney. And to those of you who look down on me and people like me who just tried for so long to do this Hercules dissection thing, to you we say, there are dozens of us. Dozens,